One of the shows of the fall 2021 anime season that I was kind of excited for was Selection Project. This is an original series, technically a multimedia project as most idol shows are. They had a great studio and a great director behind it. So obviously I had some expectations for this series. I also enjoyed the idea that it was coming from a perspective of a series where it's kind of a reality TV show mixed with an idol series where the girls themselves are all separate and competing against each other, despite the fact that that kind of goes to the wayside very quickly as it groups them up very, very quickly. But despite that, because of the reality TV aspect to it and the games they play, it does have a different twinge to it than typical idol shows. But obviously for many who have been sticking with the series for quite some while, they'll know here recently there's a bit of an issue that it's running into, especially for those that keep an eye on pretty much all idol shows that come out. That said, I want to put a big, huge warning here. I'm going to be talking about full-on spoilers for Selection Project and Idoly Pride. So if you've not watched both of those shows, you're going to run into some issues here because I will be talking about key spoiler points for the entirety of Idoly Pride, as well as everything that we've had so far with Selection Project. But if you're fine with those spoilers, and you want to get a little bit of discussion on the concept of shows borrowing concepts from each other, stay tuned. So as alluded to, the key concept of the discussion that I'm going to have in this video centers around the idea of somebody borrowing something from somebody else, and if a show has enough validity that it's worth watching despite those similarities. Often many people will put the validity of the worthiness of a show centered around the idea of how unique it is. So if a show borrows a concept or has a similar concept to something else, in a lot of cases people will deem it as worthless because it's so similar. I mean, this is the argument that's given to many isekai these days, as there's a lot of isekai, that the argument will be, well, it's just another isekai. The same thing happened to club shows, same thing happened to mechas. When you have so many similarities, often cases people will just go, it's another one of those, why bother? But I have different opinions of this concept. As we've mentioned several times in our podcast that we've done about isekais, one of the terms that my brother quoted was this concept of the couch. Where yes, you can have many couches or mini isekai, but if you have one that has a different armrest, one that's a different color, what are the differences between them that make them unique? Where you can see many couches before you, but this one looks a little different. This one probably has a better comforter. Well, this one probably has heating. They'll have these different elements that make them worth sitting in. And that's how we've always viewed isekais and technically genres that are overly done, is what will this one do that's unique that will surprise me? And that's definitely what I've experienced here recently with isekais. That's why I do the Isekai Digest video, is this idea of looking about what's unique about each one and what you might find interesting about this particular one. I mean, last season we had Tsukimichi Moonlit Fantasy, which was another isekai, but it was doing something very different. It was doing something different with the protagonist and their placement in the world, a more chaotic neutral, if you would say. Whereas typically most isekais have a justice-driven hero. But coming back to Selection Project and its kind of similarities to Idoly Pride. Again, full-on spoilers here. The similarities that we really have here is that in Idoly Pride, which was actually airing in the winter 2021 anime season, the core concept of the story of Idoly Pride was that you have this girl Sakura who joins this group, and she was at some point very frail and ill, and she gets a transplant. And the big plot twist of the story is, who did she get that transplant from? This big famous idol, Mana. And the other plot twist was, Sakura was in this group with a girl named Kotaro, and guess who Kotaro was? The sister of Mana. So you have an idol group whose core story, yes, there's a lot of other stuff in the story. There is the whole aspect of them becoming a group, all the struggles they face, going into competition, all these stuff that they actually have around that. But the core story of Idoly Pride was, here's one girl, she has a sister who is very famous. Here's this other girl who is very frail, but got heart from this famous person. And of course, the other interesting thing about that whole story was the manager was very close to this very famous singer that passed away and gave her the transplant. Now, jump to Selection Project, and now in the fall 2021 anime season, just a few seasons following that. And what is the core story of Selection Project? Suzune, who we knew was very frail from the very beginning of the story, at some point got a transplant. And who did she get that transplant? It was from Akari. And who is Akari? The sister of Rena, this other girl in the group. So again, It's the same exact concept. You have frail girl, another girl, other girl is sister of this very famous singer, and that famous singer gives girl one that heart. I tweeted a joke at some point saying, okay, now we've done the whole heart transplant thing. Now all we need is the ghost of Akari to be there along with her manager. That's all they need, and it's literally pretty darn close to Idoly Pride. And then, yes, I get responses of people saying, well, yeah, it's similar. I mean, I'm not pointing out anything that nobody else has pointed out. I mean, if you look at the forums regarding this show, tons of people are pointing out Idoly Pride. I'm not finding something nobody else is seeing. The point I'm making, though, is that I'm not saying that makes Selection Project a bad show. Not. What I'm pointing out is that the core concept of the story is kind of meh. Like, you have these two stories, Idoly Pride and Selection Project, and they're fine on their own. They're fine shows on their own. The problem that comes is that if somebody watches one before the other becomes less impactful because you've seen the core concept already. But if you were to watch Selection Project first, you'd be fine. If you watch Idoly Pride first, you're fine. The problem is the sequential and you having this core focus, this core element of the story is less impactful. And I think that's the part that sucks. And again, I will equate this to the whole situation with the very vast amount of isekais that we have right now, where it's not as if jumping into one, you're going to feel less impact by having all these elements in it that everything else has. It's more the fact that unless you have enough core aspects in there that's different, you're just another isekai. And when you're dealing with idol shows that, yes, they all have the same idea. Girls go in, they want to compete, become this famous singer that everybody loves, they want to spread joy and happiness to the world. How are you going to make it unique? Well, we'll put this core element here that makes it different. It makes it that blue couch. Well, if there's already a blue couch, you don't have enough there to make it unique. That said, I do think that Selection Project still has enough unique elements to it. Like I said, the whole reality TV show aspect given to it and them competing with different games is its unique aspect that does set it aside from Idoly Pride and many other shows. But I guess my argument is that enough? When the core aspect in the show is exactly like Idoly Pride. Because it being so similar took so much from that central dramatic beat that I think, honestly, the writer was banking on. It does beg the question, was the writer going, okay, here's my idea for the story, and then all of a sudden, here comes Idoly Pride's airing in winter, and they go, shoot. Like, what? It makes you wonder exactly at what point they were writing this, and if they seen that Idoly Pride did the same thing, or if they didn't watch it, or if they were inspired by it. That's perfectly fine. If they were inspired by what they did in Idoly Pride, and they said, we could do something similar to that, but I think it'll be different this time, but yeah, people would argue it wasn't enough different. But it's an interesting thought. And that's really what I wanted to pose here in this particular video. I hope you guys will drop down the comments and let me know your thoughts. Do you think there's enough different there? Or if you've not watched them, do you think it would impact it for you? I'm very curious. Definitely get some discussion going. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like down below. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share this video if you can. Support us on Patreon or in the tips link in the description below. And thank you everybody for your support as we just recently reached 4,500 subscriptions. That's amazing. I thank you all for that. And y'all take care.